The Utah Jazz are an American professional basketball team based in Salt Lake City. The Jazz compete in the National Basketball Association as a member of the league's Western Conference Northwest Division. Since 1991, the team has played its home games at Vivint Arena. The franchise began play as an expansion team in 1974 as the New Orleans Jazz. The Jazz moved to Salt Lake City in 1979. The Jazz were one of the least successful teams in the league in their early years. Although 10 seasons elapsed before the Jazz qualified for their first playoff appearance in 1984, they did not miss the playoffs again until 2004. During the late 1980s, John Stockton and Karl Malone arose as the franchise players for the team, and formed one of the most famed point guard power forward duos in NBA history. Led by coach Jerry Sloan, who took over from Frank Layden in 1988, they became one of the powerhouse teams of the 1990s, culminating in 2 NBA Finals appearances in 1997 and 1998, where they lost both times to the Chicago Bulls, led by Michael Jordan. Both Stockton and Malone moved on in 2003. After missing the playoffs for 3 consecutive seasons, the Jazz returned to prominence under the on-court leadership of point guard Deron Williams. However, partway through the 2010-11 season, the Jazz began restructuring after Sloan's retirement and Williams' trade to the New Jersey Nets. Quinn Snyder was hired as head coach in June 2014. With the development of Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell into All-Stars, the Jazz launched themselves back into playoff contention. On June 7, 1974, the New Orleans Jazz were admitted as an expansion franchise into the National Basketball Association. Team officials selected the name because of its definition in the dictionary. Collective improvisation. The team began its inaugural season in New Orleans in the 1974-75 season. The team's first major move was to trade for star player Pete Maravich from the Atlanta Hawks for 2 first-round draft picks, 3 second-round picks, and 1 third-round pick over the next 3 years. Although he was considered one of the most entertaining players in the league and won the scoring championship for the 1976-77 season with 31.1 points per game. The Jazz's best record while in New Orleans was 39-43 in the 1977-78 season. Maravich struggled with knee injuries from that season onward until they ended in 1985. Venue issues were a continual problem for the team while it was based in New Orleans. In the Jazz's first season, they played in the Municipal Auditorium in Loyola Fieldhouse, where the basketball court was raised so high that the NBA Players Association made the team put a net around the court to prevent players from falling off of the court and into the stands. Later, the Jazz played games in the cavernous Louisiana Superdome. But things were no better. Because of high demand for the stadium, onerous lease terms, and Maravich's constant knee problems, they also faced the prospect of spending a whole month on the road each year because of New Orleans Mardi Gras festivities, similar to the long road trip faced by the San Antonio Spurs each season during their city's rodeo. Years later, founding owner Sam Battistone claimed that there was no contingency plan in case the Jazz had ever qualified for the playoffs. However, the Superdome's manager at the time, Bill Curl, said that the stadium's management always submitted a list of potential playoff dates to the Jazz management, but these letters were never answered. After what turned out to be their final season in New Orleans, the Jazz were dealt a further humiliation when the Los Angeles Lakers selected Magic Johnson with the first overall pick in the 1979 NBA draft. The pick would have been the Jazz's had they not traded it to acquire Gail Goodrich 2 years earlier. Also, the Jazz had given up the rights to Moses Malone in order to regain one of the 3 first-round picks used for the Goodrich trade. The combination of Johnson and Malone blossoming into Hall of Famers and Goodrich's ineffective, injury-ruined few years in New Orleans made this transaction one of the most lopsided in NBA history. Despite being barely competitive, the Jazz drew well during their first 5 years. However, by 1979 the franchise was sinking financially. Barry Mendelson, the team's executive vice president for most of the early years, said one factor in the financial trouble was an 11% amusement tax, highest in the US at the time. The team also could not attract much local corporate support, an important factor even in those days, or local investors, deciding that the Jazz could not be viable in New Orleans. Battistone decided to move elsewhere. After scouting several new homes, he decided on Salt Lake City. Even though it was a smaller market, Salt Lake City had previously been home to the Utah Stars of the American Basketball Association. From 1970 to 1976, the Stars had been extremely popular in the city and